Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Design Code series, a podcast where we chat about how AI, data, and design are shaping our world. Think of this as a space to explore how these technologies influences our surroundings, from homes to cities. I'm your host, Sara, an AI scientist and fellow architecture enthusiast, coming to you from Delft University of Technology. This podcast series is proudly sponsored by the AI initiative at TU Delft. This is the second part of the first episode, Civic Code Using AI for the Public Good, featuring two incredible guests, Sara Williams, an associate professor at MIT and director of the Civic Data Design Lab, and Angela Rout, an assistant professor at TU Delft's Faculty of Architecture, my colleague and the director of the Living Data Studies. If you haven't seen the first part, please watch that one first and then come back to this one, since we will dive deeper into the topics of the part one in this part. You can find the first part in the link down below.
And by saying design, I always think of action. It's something that is maybe missing me as a my background as a scientist. We're curious to do things, but we really don't know what's the action behind it or after it even. So if we think design as an action, what kind of design action do you see that would relate to living data? Can you give us some examples? Maybe you've thought about it, or you have inspiration. I don't know.
I think that's the question. I think because when you're making the flip from using data kind of like from a scientific perspective to trying to say now, okay, how do I use that into making decisions as a designer? And I think it's you have to like switch hats in a way, because when you're acting as a designer, you're not really necessarily being a scientist, and it's very difficult to do both, or maybe I don't know if it's even possible. And typical language to talk about it is data-informed design. So it's about, finding out the information using data and then using that as like the information. So you could talk about, research as being evidence for design decisions, let's say. But we all know in practice it doesn't always work that way, and that not every architect is now trying to make every decision by looking up every research paper to figure out, okay, now where do I put this wall? There's a sort of a very creative process happening there, and sometimes it's intuitive, and sometimes it's bits of information you heard sort of at a meeting or with a client, and it's maybe not recorded necessarily or analyzed the way you would scientifically with a data set or with to produce sort of evidence, but it becomes the data of your work. And so I think, to me, I'm super curious about that, but working with, design students and also who are really, really keen to incorporate data into their work, and also with architects who are also wanting to really bring evidence into their decisions and justify them with data in a sort of a thoughtful way, but also recognizing there's not a research paper written on every single building possible design, and how do I gather that? And also they do not have the time or resources or to be able to be doing that through their design process. So I think maybe AI, maybe different data literacy methods, maybe there's different I think this is the space for innovation right now, to me, is to finding not only methods, tools, it could be technologies, but it could also be sort of processes that allow us to do this sort of thoughtfully and really grounded in, justifiable decisions and sort of that are rooted not just in sort of one person's individual bias, but that have lots of perspectives, but that are also sort of enabling a creative process. I think that's, I don't know, that's the big question. How do you do that? I mean, to me, I'm quite fond of just calling on because I think that we don't really know how to do this. There's no real answer. So for me, I'm really just fond of using everything, trying everything, and So yeah, qualitative methods, methods from social sciences, methods from ecology, methods from computer science, and just, bring them all to the table and playing. And I think, yeah, you can do that a bit in architecture where maybe you couldn't do that in a science discipline because you wouldn't really have the freedom in a way because it's such a creative sort of environment. So to me but recognizing also you're not necessarily going to come up with the ultimate answer, but you're going to have room and space to play and be creative and try and learn. And yeah, so that's kind of where we're at. I think it's a really innovative space.
I like that you say, well, architecture is a data discipline, perhaps, and I see information and information overload. So it seems that there should be a way to translate this information into design insight or technical knowledge. And with that, I want to go back to Sara because I heard in one of your projects you were showing these reports, lots of pages going on, and then you ask whether the message goes across with really like all these papers, sending it to policymakers or whoever wants to make a decision, action, design, you know. And then you thought, okay, there should be a better way to visualize this data so that people can interact with it, can actually see the information and maybe even get a bit more subjective view on how they would interact or how would they understand the data. So I would like to ask you again, success stories about data visualization and how that helped to get the message through.
Yeah. Thanks so much for the question. Yeah, I mean, I think as designers or editors, at the heart of what designers do is really edit out all of this information that we take in the process, in our design process, and think about, because there's only so many messages a drawing or building or kind of can convey. And I think you're talking about a project I worked on where we interviewed 5,000 migrants. We asked over 100 questions, right? We had so many findings and facts from that. And we really had to sit and think to ourselves, how can we edit this down into something that really gets to the key messages that we want to get across? And as designers, we kind of worked on, so this is where the subjective nature of data comes in. What is the message that we wanted to say? What did we want to reinforce with our evidence-based decision making? And one of the things that we were really interested in that particular project that, is really showing the impact on having legal passage for migrants. And so we went back to our data and kind of looked at all of the information that would help kind of convey that, and then bring that in a way that when we showed it in a quick image, some of these ideas came out very quickly through the design, the way that we either made the chart, the graph, or the interaction of it. But I think what's important in everything that I just said is it's inherently a biased project that I pursued, right? I had a particular data set. I did find evidence for the need for legal passage for migration. I think I had a lot of evidence. And I was presenting a message and a story that guided people through what I thought would be the best policy. And I think that's one of the things that where my architecture background came really into play, because as architects, we're trained to tell stories. Why should this building exist? Why should this park exist? What is the evidence there? And I think in the same way that we are thinking about policies around migration, I was really like, how do I build this story for my audience? What connects with them? What are the things that they know, or how would they see that information more quickly? Because we unfortunately have a short attention span, and being able to read that quickly through design and then dive in and ask more questions. So design allows us to get that initial idea and picture, and allows us to then uncover and unravel like an onion the different layers of it. So that's a really exciting. I do want to some of the things that you were talking about earlier. I want to talk about a little bit because I think it's so interesting. If can we do that? Have a
Of course.
Because I was thinking about. I was a data scientist first, and then I went to architecture school. So navigating data and architecture is something like, I mean, as a beginning architect, I thought about all the time how to, I came from a really evidence-based science fact. This is the answer. There's a right answer. There's a wrong answer. My data says this, therefore we should do this. And
I'm still struggling. So tell me about it.
And architecture blew my mind because, yes, you can use data as evidence for some of the decisions that you make, but you have to walk the line between how much you use that and how much of then creative influences you add into it and references, right? And that there's this gray zone again that we talk about, and using data in designing buildings, I think, because we have to allow for that creative process to enter in as well. And so we can measure the ecological landscape. We can think about water retention. We can think about biodiversity. It's super important to think about all those things. But then how do we meld these with some of the more subjective aspects of our field? What it feels to come across a threshold, what light and air does within a building, and these kind of qualitative feel. And so I think this will be, this is probably the oldest problem of architecture that exists, is that it's this melding of this abstract elements or abstract qualities of beauty and transgression through space and place combined with these really hard facts. And I think that's what's so exciting to be an architect that can think on both levels, because it allows you to think about new ways to meld that. And really, it is about a lived experience. And I think that's something that I really got beat into me in my first years, because I was like, data, but it's this. But if it's not something that somebody wants to be in or live in or live as a data, then we're not doing our jobs as architects. So it's kind of, and I just love the navigation of the two.
Can I add something?
Yeah,
or
sure.
Add something?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I think it's really interesting you said that, because I was an architect first, and an artist, and then I became a data scientist. So I was like the opposite.
You were
experience.
the opposite of me.
And one thing that struck me was actually how much design is in data modeling. And I always imagined it is a hard science.
Yeah.
I understand. There are like rigorous methods and everything. But I mean, I think I will be talking a bit about this tonight. I don't know how much I'll be able to sort of convey how I just realized that even in, say, like constructing, let's say, a model, a scientific model, a data model, sort of like a regression model or something, there's so many I would call them design decisions. What variables do you include? How do you filter, like when you filter it, how much do you filter it and what do you filter it on? And how do you prioritize? And what are the relationships in your model? Are you looking for, like dependencies? Are you looking for interactions? Is your model going to be hierarchical? How are you like producing, this model? And then what types of questions are you asking of it? And what can you actually ask of it? And I think all of that then is, to me, I don't know. I always approach that like as a designer.
But that's why we call them architecture. That's that's the first architecture I knew, the computer architecture.
It's always a problem when you're looking up literature, because the word in is the same, right? In computer science,
it's an architecture.
Yes.
It's differently a design. But I would say in a really small scale, and then you can really experiment with it faster when it comes to buildings and even urban scale. I mean, your
Yeah.
decisions have much more impact also on people. So
Yeah.
I think it's a scale difference in here.
No, but it's interesting because we're both, I mean, seeing the value in the other methods. And it's the melding of the two where it gets really exciting. So you're kind of thinking about our methods and then how did that method apply then to the ways of, the ways of which we think about creativity. Yeah.
I think no matter what, I mean, I think the more that I don't, maybe, I think that no matter what, the human has to be in it. And our, like if we try and say that we're going to make a decision and we're going to make it so quantitative and so precise that there's not going to be any sort of lived human intuition in it at all or any kind of creativity, I think we will probably come up with not a great decision. I don't know. I think that there's always some element to acknowledge about our understanding of the world that sort of gets folded into the way that we work with and even in science. So so I think there's always this meshing.
Absolutely.
So talking about interdisciplinary and creativity and inspiration, I was just looking at your project, Sara, that you worked with, and as I mentioned before, I find it very innovative, thought-provoking, and bold in some sense. This migration project, the project that you had in Nairobi, the prison. Where do you get the inspiration? How do you come up with these ideas? This is a more personal advice maybe for also us as researchers, because it really is inspiring because you see the impact immediately and you see the touch on people and vulnerable groups and all these things. So where do you get your ideas from? Give us the source, ChatGPT or
I mean, I think at the heart of everything, I mean, my parents were journalists, and I've living in a household of journalists. I've always been interested in civics. I mean, obviously, I'm an urban planner, but telling untold stories is maybe an important value that came from my parents and still inside me. So I think at the heart of everything, I'm thinking about what are the stories of people on the margin and how can I use my superpower to help them, I think is where it comes from. And so when we think about the work that I did in Nairobi, it started from I needed to create a transportation model to improve the quality of life for citizens, but I realized that they didn't have this essential data set, and that's where my superpower can come to play, right? Let me figure out how I can help them. The migration work, which has been more recent and has probably been a long-standing interest, is the stories of migrants. Why do they make the passage? What are some of the ways that we can help them, and how much codependence we have? And it's a worldwide issue and problem. It's not just the U.S. And so I think in that project it was kind of this lingering thread that was with me. And then finally I had an introduction to a colleague at the World Food Program who really needed our help thinking about how she could use data to understand this problem. So I think that was it was a long-standing thing that I was interested in, and making people aware of that helped to make those connections. But I mean, I think they come from maybe that heart of how can I use my superpower to help people on the margins of society. And I think that data is a superpower, but also communicating it, and that's my architecture aspect of things. So.
I love it when you call it superpower, and I also feel the confidence even over here, because sometimes in this tech landscape, and then this like tech giants ruling basically the way we live, and also recently I think with the AI they also influence a lot. I would say universities and knowledge institutes, they took lots of great brains basically, and I always ask myself, so what is the mission of, let's say, scholars today, to be proactive, to be influential, when it seems, at least it seems, that most power goes into these tech giants. And like that you mentioned this because you're using this word superpower, and I love it.
I mean, I've been telling since January 20th in the U.S. I've been telling my students, like, what can we do in this crazy new political landscape that we live in? And again, it goes back to each one of us has a way to affect change that comes from our knowledge base and our resources. And so again, I keep saying to my students, let's use our superpowers to think about what to do in this new era of American democracy, which is going to be really struggling. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but our census data is offline. Most of the health and human services data has been taken offline. All of that is illegal. And for those of us that use data for action, it's imperative that we fight these issues. And so these are some of the things. So I think about it because I tell my students, when we started having meetings, school came back, I'm like, we need to use our superpower. So we are data specialists. Let's fight the data. We can fight a lot of things, but let's, because each one of us is going to have to be working towards the change that we want to see in our government, and using our superpowers the way that you create that change.
That's really heartwarming. Well, not what's happening, of course, but
happening.
but
And I
your
hope we get
attitude.
Oh,
we
man.
just have to do. Yeah, we have to use it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's true. But I think you'll find a way. We will find a way. So I try to keep optimistic on all this.
I know. I mean, it's so interesting though at this point of this conference, right? Because I mean, Trump understands data is power, and removing that data is power too. And so he's using it as a tool and a weapon, as he is so many other things. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that it just is, it's such so poignant point that the value of data in that situation when you don't have it. I mean, when there's almost too much of it, sometimes you feel like you take it for granted, but in a way, when you suddenly don't have access to it, it's, yeah.
I mean, what
very
do you say
real.
when you don't have basic data counts of people? And I think, one of the things that I've done a lot of work is in many cities in Africa, we don't have basic data about where people live and commuting patterns. And that means that the needs of those people are not met. When we remove data, basic census data, needs of people aren't met. And that's what you can use it as evidence for not giving people services and not providing healthcare, not providing other kinds of civil services. So that's where it gets really scary. So we have to fight it.
But that's, I think this co-ownership of data would be interesting here, because they would, I don't know the legal terms, but it seems that they could do this because this data belongs to the government. So they have ownership over it, even though that, I don't know how these things has been set from the first day. So if there are other ways to actually make this clear or legal, the ownership of data and who has access to it, maybe in the future that wouldn't be possible to do this as quickly.
Yeah, I mean, technically the census data is a public good, so it is illegal what he's doing. And so that's why most of these fights are being, so that is illegal. But then when we get back to, let's say, the training data in generative AI, those are privately made, totally outside of any kind of government previewer. And that's where this co-ownership model, I think, is really important. If we can start developing data that is built by specialized communities that allow access to it, but is more kind of public-private, and that we create models to open that data up, I think we will get more nuanced data sets like iNaturalist has, but also have something that deals with some of the proprietary issues of a landscape that's totally dominated by private companies doing this work. It's hard for governments to make AI systems, though, like, as you know.
It is, but they're not alone.
Yeah.
On this. So we talked a lot about the potential of data and the value of data. But also from your book, I remember this term that we should work with data and do visualize data and open data as long as there is no harm being done. So I would like to ask you about maybe an example in your projects when the gray zone appeared again. So sometimes it's really black and white. So I shouldn't use this data, or how do I use it, or anonymize it, etc. But sometimes it's really difficult to decide. Did you have any projects that, or example that you can share with us?
I mean, I would say almost every project has an example, and that's because I think the same data sets can almost always be used for the opposite arguments. So it's really important the ways in which we tell the narrative of the story around the data that we're using. But maybe I'll give two examples or one example.
Sure.
How much time? I think one example is the work that I did in collecting data in Nairobi, Kenya, on the popular transport system, are these small buses that are outside of government control but are really the main form of public transport. And we worried about visualizing that data, that if we were to make these systems transparent, would they cause police crackdowns? Would some of them were running on illegal routes? And in many ways, these systems provide an essential resource, even though that they're not government sanctioned, or some of them don't have permits. And so one of the things that we did is really ask around, like, would visualizing this data cause these kinds of political actions against the matatus? These are what these small buses are called. And in this case, we found out that actually it wouldn't, and it would be very helpful for the system in terms of thinking about resources, building bus stops, and kind of creating more safety and urban design mechanisms in the roadway. But after we did our work in Nairobi, we had many cities that came to us wanting us to help them, and we have a rather large network of cities that we've kind of helped since that project. And each one, we always ask that question: is there more potential for doing harm than good by visualizing these systems? And in several cities, we chose not to help because, in fact, it would mean the eradication of the system. And at that point, that is the only system that many people of the low income levels had to access. So I think that's why it's so important to ask, what and who might co-opt your work and use it for harm. You obviously have good intentions, but to kind of think through that process.
Yeah, so it's not an easy decision. So you have to see really through what kind of political or private...
And this is where the kind of living aspects of data becomes really important. And something that I talked about earlier is this human oversight. We need to have that conversation with data in order to make sure it lives in a way that's helpful and not harmful. And asking these questions are something whether it's critiquing the data set or critiquing our interest in developing that data.
Yeah, and what about the other projects? Maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
$1 million blocks. I have a
million-
list in
yeah,
Lost Cities in
that is-
China, Living Heritage in Beirut. I would love to, and also the audience, I think they would love to know about these fascinating projects.
Yeah, I mean, I would say when I thought about then more harm than good, the $1 Million Blocks project also came to mind, and as something our team had lots of conversations about it. And just for reference of the audience, this project I did with Laura Kurgan and Eric Kadora, who was at the Justice Mapping Lab. And what we did is we took data about where people lived before they went to prison, and then we added it up buck by buck, and we found that many blocks in New York City and cities across the country, we spent over $1 million to incarcerate people in just 1 year. But in that same year, we don't provide proper education, job training programs, even healthcare, housing. And that ultimately our response to poverty is often putting people in prison rather than thinking about the systemic issues. But the maps that we made, these kind of advocacy maps, which showed these $1 million blocks as bright red, of course, we're often located in low-income communities, and we worried about producing maps that might then further blight these communities. So by marking them as having significant amounts of people that were in the incarceration system, were we further marking them as other or problematic or places to stay away from. And it's a debate that we had quite often. And I think, the way that we resolved it is the messaging and storytelling around the maps and the data and the way they were used. And really using them as a advocacy tool rather than these kind of evidence for this other potential harm. And I have yet to seen the maps be co-opted in that way, but it was something that we were very concerned about, and spent a lot of time debating and thinking about the colors of the maps, how we presented the story around them, in order to make sure that it was really highlighting the need for money in those communities and the misallocation of resources.
I
Yeah.
think these are really good examples because and it's a sort of self-regulation that we were talking about. I think it's easier as a researcher to self-regulate than companies when there are revenues and monies, and the decision making becomes a bit more complicated. But because these projects that you did, they really have impact on communities, and what you tried was also to avoid harm and bringing the value in what you did. How is this going? Is it that you start the research and then you go to the policymakers and present the results, or do they come to you? Do you have examples where they actually came to you asking for information or data? I'm trying to find basically how can we make impact as researchers? Is it something that we need to proactively search to reach out to these people, or are they looking for us in a good way?
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is in all the projects I build the team from the start, right? So in the $1 Million Blocks project I was just talking about, we have the policy experts. We had somebody from the criminal justice policy maker that was on our team, who's not necessarily a data person, not necessarily a designer, but really knows the policy and knows where messages are not getting across. And I feel like almost every project that I have, we have that person on our team, and if we don't have it, we seek it out in order to, because I think for many of the policy questions, they know the thing that they've been trying to get across year over year over year and is not getting through, and we are novices in that, experiment with that, and so having that knowledge, it just helps us build much better projects. So whether it was $1 million blocks, but even in the recent migration work, we had the Migration Policy Institute and the Center for Mixed Migration, the Mixed Migration Council was involved. People from the Organization of American States that do migration work were on our team and really helped us guide the messaging around it. So, I mean, I think we always start with what is the thing that you're trying to express that? If you just wish people could understand that issue, you know, what would it be? And we always start from that and then kind of think about, and that goes back to, you know, the editing process that we do. You know, so when we think about the migration project, you know, that's one of the things that we asked our colleagues, what are the message that's not getting across? But what do you feel like tears the heartstring of the policy people that you're dealing with? I mean, and in the case of migration, it's money. Well, lots of things come back to money. $1 million blocks, right? Like tracing the money can kind of really help pull those policymaker advocacy. When governments see the mass amount of money, they wake up and pay attention. And yeah.
Okay, show me the money.
Show me the money, exactly.
So I see in Angie's eyes that she might have questions for you. So is there something that you want to jump into?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I was nodding a lot because I think it's really interesting you bring up the role of the policy person. Just because, well, I had a few thoughts, but I mean, it makes sense because I think policy people deal with evidence. To me, people who are working in policy areas, they really also understand research in a way. So it's very nice because that person, I imagine, has a grip. Usually when you talk to a policy person, you're not getting their individual personal bias. You know, I think when you talk to a policy, I don't know, this is just maybe you can respond, but I think typically they're going to have a strong feeling that way because they have either been doing the work for a long time, but they've also been gathering a lot of information from many things. And policy gets built from many, many pieces of information over a long time. And because I was thinking, it's interesting to come at it. I mean, in a way, you're coming at doing a data visualization with a very strong intention of a piece of communication that you want to get across. I mean, that's a sort of like strong design pedagogical approach, which is to first understand what the core design idea is and what are you trying to achieve in your design. So if it's a visualization, you know whether or not it's successful if it communicates that. And I mean, I was nodding because I think that it's nice to go to a person who really would know. And in this case, it would be the policy person of what's the message we really need to communicate. Otherwise, maybe you'll spend another 5 years trying to figure out what's the message we should say. Yeah.
I mean, I think the other interesting thing about working with the policymaker is they've tried so many things. We've tried this avenue, and it hasn't worked or it hasn't. And so it helps kind of, I mean, you're building on their work, basically.
Yeah.
And then I think the other things that's nice is we're maybe not as, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're jaded, but, you know, they've struggled in many different ways. And we come in with fresh eyes and a new approach. And it's, and thinking about data communication in this way that I think most of the policymakers that we've worked with are taking a risk because it's out of their toolbox. They're used to the chart and the graph and, you know, let's go. So they're taking a risk, but we can like interpret their ideas and maybe shine a new avenue or a kind of new way of thinking about it that maybe they haven't had before. And I think that's what is really nice about collaborative work, is that we all approach it through our lens, and then when those kind of hit or intersect, it's where the kind of spark comes. So it's always a fun project.
Great. I think we are all trying to do something useful, and how to make it happen. I think these are all the ingredients. When I started working at the Faculty of Architecture, what I noticed was that seems that everyone has data and they wanted to do something with the data, but their data was different than my perception as a or a computer scientist to data. So there was this gap between data, and now I'm excited to share that we are actually building this new initiative at the Department of Architecture, the Data Refinery Lab, which is basically a hub for researchers like you to get access to ready-to-use data, because I know that, and you know that, and everyone who works with actual data, real-world data, knows that it takes a lot of time before you have high-quality data that you can trust and work with, to get it from what sources, to clean it, and to make it ready. And we are trying to build this platform, this hub for cleaning data and making it public to people who want to make a difference, who want to act on this, to design. I always act and design, for me it's the same word. So my question to you would be, how can we serve you if you want to start a project, or if you're working on a project? What kind of data do you imagine? Where is that data, and what kind of quality do you imagine for data for you to be actionable?
Oh, wow.
That's a tough one.
That's a tough question. I mean, I imagine every architect or designer would have a different data that they're super interested in, because...
No, but I'm asking you, so
right.
This is like a question for Sara Williams.
What data if I had any data set that I needed in the world?
Yes. So this one data set that you think, okay, if I just had access to that data.
I just had access to that data. Oh my God, there's so many things are running through my head, and I don't know why this one is running through my head, but really just populate movement data. And I know that sounds like a strange thing, but I think like how populations, and we have that a bit in cell phone information, but where populations are, how are they moving, how are they conflicting with other? I think this gets back to my interest in migration again, because as climate change occurs and flows of people are changing due to weather conditions, patterns, economics changing, that movement data is important. But in many places that I go, I basically can't even find population information, and for so many places in the world. And so then my mind started going through all of the missing data that we have. We have so much missing data in the world, whether it's environmental data, data on population. And in some cases, that data exists, but only by big private institutions like Facebook or Google. And so I would hope that we can create the data to provide the services and needs for people that are missing. So I know that missing data is an abstract, but like, let's just take environmental data. When we look at maps of Africa, I don't think we realize, like, we see, kind of things that are interpolated across the whole continent. But really, like, when you uncover that and look at the data points, there's maybe 20 data points describing the whole condition. And so I don't know that I answered your question, though.
I think it was also interesting because one of the things I talked to architecture, it seems very static, and then you said movement. I think this is quite interesting, that how movement, because it's spatial, and any spatial data would be interesting for architects.
Well, I think I don't know, but my hunch is that when you have movement data, it's inherently spatial.
Yeah.
So then it's like inherently connected to place, and then there's just even more, layers. And I think for sure in architecture, it's always been a challenge because GPS data is doesn't great indoors, and there's always this challenge of identifying locations and movement of people inside at a sort of like more fine scale is also like, that's a really missing data set in architecture too. So and also problematic because the privacy issue. So it's a difficult thing
It's
when
a
you're
hard navigation.
But that was an ideal word when we can give Sara whatever she wants.
there you go.
But I think also, like I started as a landscape architect, so like understanding how we move through space, and how small changes in that can create just open up a new world for people. I mean, just by creating like a new lane, a road, highway, path, bike lane, so forth, really changes how we feel in a city. And so understanding and being able to analyze those changes is maybe where I'm getting at in terms of thinking about architecture.
So they're signing that, unfortunately, we have to close this session, even though that the conversation is going very interesting and wild. So I want to ask for your last words for the audience. What do you want to tell? What do you think that one thing that you would like the audience to know about design and data, maybe?
I mean, I think that when we're thinking about data, really how to communicate stories that connect to the human experience, and to remember that designing with data is also about storytelling. And I think sometimes we go to the output of the beautiful representation, but telling the data's journey is really important to that narrative too, and can people help understand. So I'm also very interested in data's journeys and how we as designers can communicate that journey.
Amazing. I'll keep that in mind for the Data Refinery Lab. And I have the same question to you, Angie. Last insight about data and design.
Last insight. I wish I had a super profound, nice thing to say, but I guess just, stay tuned. Living data studies just started, and I think maybe just remember data is living in all the sort of various ways that we talked about today.
I mean, I love that you call it living data, because I always say that all data are people.
Yeah.
And data is people. So I love that you're calling it living data. So it's fantastic.
So stay tuned, living data, and see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching or listening to this episode. If you have questions for my guests and me, please comment them down below. If you would like to learn more about me, Sara, please contact me at s.academy@sciencetudelft.nl. If you would like to learn more about our sponsor, the TU Delft AI Initiative, please visit their website at ai.tudelft.nl.